Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Bob Abrams, my guest, tells the joy of public service, its challenges and satisfaction in his charming and inspiring memoir, The Luckiest Guy in the World, My Journey in Politics. And he's my guest today. I think political careers like yours are so inspiring, and I hope that young people and other people too, because I don't think people even understand how important it is to vote, right? Bob, welcome.
Ronnie, you're very gracious with your initial comments here, and I can't tell you what a treat it is to be on your program. We go back a long time. I remember you. I remember you from the '60s, from the Lindsay administration.
Exactly, and from the reform movement. And the Bronx was a little behind Manhattan, but that's all right.
That's true. That's true.
I wonder, I was thinking about this. Do you think our background in fighting the old kind of machine politics inspired us to be the kind of public servants you are?
Well, there's no question. That's how I got into politics. I never dreamt that I would run for public office. I was sort of a shy guy, and I never entered my mind. I mean, I liked history. I liked government. I read about it. I was a student, but I never dreamt that I would be a candidate. I talk a little bit about that in the book, how, I talk about how to students a lot when I speak. The Attorney General has recently once again invited me to speak to her summer interns, and I'll say, you can't plan your life, you can't chart your life. I use the word serendipitous. The life is serendipitous.
So do I. I use that same word.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I say you don't know how you're going to meet your mate. You don't know really what's going to happen in the course of your life in terms of your career. If you're a lawyer, you really don't know what you're going to specialize in. You think you're going to go in this direction, and then suddenly you go in that direction.
You grew up in the Bronx. Were you interested in politics? So go back to earlier times.
No, I was. What got me in, I was a student at Columbia. I was taking a government course. My professor was a very distinguished man, Professor David Truman. He later became the dean of the college. And he gave an assignment. He said every student in the class has to write about his congressional district. At that time, Columbia was all male. It wasn't co-ed yet. And so, and the assignment was, you got to write about your congressional district. Tell me everything about it. What are the boundaries? Who lives in the district? What are the socioeconomics of the district? Who is the representative? Tell me about him. And then he said at the end, and I want you to interview your congressman. So, I began to do the research, and then I got to the point where, I better try to call up my congressman, who then was a guy named Charlie Buckley. He was not only my congressman and a 30-year veteran of the House of Representatives and the chairman of the Public Works Committee, but he was the boss of the Bronx. And so I looked in the phone book for his district office, and lo and behold, there was no district office. And so I think, I'll call his office in Washington. So I called once, I called twice, I called 3 times. I said, I'm a student, I have to interview the congressman. I live in his district. My parents have been there for ages. And I left 1 message, 2 messages, 3 messages, and no one called me back. And in the end, I never got to interview my congressman because I couldn't do it.
Our experiences are so similar. I had that same assignment, and I went. My congressman was Saul Bloom, and I could never get to see him. Never. Anyway, go on.
So that's what made us reformers, because what happened was, so I never got a chance to interview. I turned in the paper, and I got a pretty good grade, but I thought my grade suffered because maybe, Professor Truman thought I didn't try hard enough, or, I wasn't really serious about this. And so a couple of years later, I get a phone call. I was in law school. I was at NYU Law School, and there was a reception, and it was held by Francis W.H. Adams, who was active in the reform movement. He was the former police commissioner of the city of New York. And he said, all of you are going to become lawyers. You're in law school now. It's not enough to just be a lawyer. You should be involved in your community. You should be involved in government. You should be involved in politics. And that's the way in which you make reform and change. and they sent the names of all the students who were there to the local reform clubs. And in my neighborhood, it was the Bronx Pelham Reform Democratic Club at 708 Lydic Avenue. And I got a phone call from somebody, and he said, look, we know you went to that reception, and we want to recruit you to work in a campaign. I said, well, it was a great reception. And, frankly, I got a lot on my plate. I'm helping my dad in the store, and I'm still a student, and I don't really have the time. And they said, no, we have a lot of great, we have a lot of great races, and you really should be involved. I said, well, look, it's maybe at some point in the future, but I can't now. No, you must. We're running for party office, and we're running for public office. And we're challenging the congressman, Charlie Buckley. I said, what did you say? I said, we're running a race against Charlie Buckley. I said, oh, that son of a, you've got me. You got me. And that's how I got into politics. I campaigned for David Levy, who was running against Charlie Buckley. And that was the start of a 28-year.
That's so great. So you ran for the assembly. You spent 6 years in the assembly. Then how long as borough president?
So I was 3 terms in the assembly, and I got elected 3 times as borough president, all against the machine. When I ran for the assembly, I was 27 years old, 2 years out of law school. My local assemblyman was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the most powerful committee in the state assembly. Again, it was a David and Goliath race. I was never expected to win, and lo and behold, on primary night, I won. And then they tried to they did change my district. They reapportioned me, but I won again, and I was challenged by the organization. And then a third time, they challenged me again for a third time in the assembly. And then an opportunity arose for me to run for borough president. Herman Badillo was the Reform Bronx borough president, and he was running for mayor. So it opened it up, and I ran for borough president, and I had a big challenge from the Reg organization. My entire career, when I ran for attorney general, I ran against the party mechanism and the bosses.
Did you really? Yeah. They didn't realize either that the more they attacked you, the more popular you became.
Well, the ordinary people in the district, they appreciated independence. I think you saw that, and you guys were our heroes, the West Side reformers. It was Jerry Kretschmer and Al Blumenthal and William Fitzryan and all of you on the party level, Ronnie, all of you were big heroes of ours. And so we try to replicate that in the Bronx, and it spilled over into Queens and to Brooklyn as well.
You really like people, and you really have principles, right? And you really have goals. But as Attorney General, you were really an incredible Attorney General. I mean, as far as I can tell, you really changed the way that office ran, right?
Well, Ronnie, it was a unique moment, and it was a great opportunity. I loved my 15 years as Attorney General. I was the first Democrat elected Attorney General in 40 years. And I was committed to change and reform the office in New York. And lo and behold, it gave me an opportunity to change the office of Attorney General with my colleagues all across the country, because Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, a couple of years after I was elected Attorney General, and he brought to power the concept of laissez-faire government. He wanted to get the government off the back of business, and he put the consumer watchdog, the protector of people, to sleep. So there was no longer antitrust enforcement. There was no longer civil rights enforcement. There was no longer environmental enforcement. All of those protections that were ingrained in the law, they had to be effectuated by enforcement at the federal level. And Ronald Reagan appointed people who did nothing. And so what happened was the problems didn't go away. In fact, they magnified. And so they fell at the doorstep of state attorneys general. And that gave me a chance to cooperate with my colleagues. We were a different breed and creed in those days. We cooperated with one another. It didn't matter whether we were Democrats or Republicans. And I became the president of the National Association of Attorneys General. And we had an agenda of working together in a nonpartisan, bipartisan way, bringing law actions together in antitrust, returning money to the wallets and pocketbooks of consumers when there was unfair competition, working on all kinds of matters in a multi-state investigations and multi-state enforcement, and it expanded the role of Attorney General. That's made this so exciting, because depending upon who is in office, it's malleable. You can reshape it. And historically, the office of Attorney General was defensive. Your role was to defend the sovereign, to defend the state. But in the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s, there began to be some gradual change. Some of my predecessor began to do some affirmative work in consumer protection and environmental protection. And then I try to take it a quantum step further, doing important cases, big institutional cases that would return lots of money to consumers
So
in New York and all across the country.
You took every opportunity. I mean, like Love Canal, right? Environmental, what you did for or all of you attorney generals did for the environment. I mean, that was very helpful.
Well, that's a good example with regard to the environment, on the environmental side. Before I was Attorney General, there was never a lawsuit to clean up a toxic waste site. And Love Canal was a serious issue. 40 million pounds of toxic, dangerous chemicals were pumped into the ground. A thin layer of clay was put over with some grass. 900 homes were built on top of it, a couple of schools, and people were being poisoned. People were getting all kinds of diseases, holes in the heart, all kinds, cancer diseases, disfigurement of all different kinds. And so people came to the Attorney General saying, you got to do something about this. And so we investigated the matter. We ultimately brought a $650 million lawsuit against Occidental Petroleum. And we worked with the federal government, I testified before Congress in getting a federal Superfund law passed. And we eventually were able to remediate the Love Canal and other sites of that company. And before I left being Attorney General, I had 65 lawsuits. I instituted 65 lawsuits in different parts of New York State to clean up the dangerous dumping of these chemicals, because when they're dumped, they don't just stay in one place. They migrate. They come in contact with water supply. They poison the aquifer. And women who are pregnant were terrified about turning on the tap and poisoning the baby and the child that they were carrying. And so this was very gratifying work, being able to protect the environment, protect consumers, protect people's civil rights. And that's why I was a very energetic Attorney General. And I was able to attract a lot of men and women, lawyers from the private sector who left big time jobs in big law firms, taking huge cuts in salary to come to work in the Attorney General's office, as well as those who were in the public sector already at legal services and legal aid, in the public defenders' offices and district attorneys' offices. So we were able to aggregate hundreds of lawyers who shared my commitment and my values. They came to work early, they stayed late, and they had great fulfillment and gratification in doing the people's work.
It was, I mean, you organized also. It's interesting, you brought your political skills to your substantive work, which is something that doesn't always happen today, or really with a lot of people. Isn't that true? I mean, you included people and you chose your ally, your force. It was really great.
We did. We put together coalitions, whether they were organizations or groups in the various cities around New York State, interested in women's issues, interested in consumer issues, civil rights issues, choice. It was a controversial issue. It still is. I was a very strong defender of a woman's right to control her body. And so I began to file briefs in the Supreme Court on the issue of reproductive freedom of choice. And I reached out to other attorneys general. There weren't that many in those days who were willing to take that position. But you're right, it was organizing groups, organizing different states, organizing, Republicans and Democrats, and it didn't matter whether the state was large or the state was small. We showed mutual concern and mutual respect on a whole constellation of issues, and we made a difference. And so the Attorney General became a frontline protector. Historically, it was a pretty quiet office, but now, wherever you live in the country, the state Attorney General is an important player. In the Trump days, just as in the Reagan era, I was able to lead attorneys general. In the Trump era, you had again stepping back from enforcement, and state attorneys general stepped into the breach on a whole range of issues like immigration, consumer protection, and civil rights enforcement.
They did it, and to a large extent, that happened during the Trump administration. I don't know how many Republican attorney generals joined them, but I think some did, didn't they? I would assume.
Yeah, again, in our more recent era, it's gotten more partisan.
Yeah.
You know, when I was there was only one organization of attorneys general, the National Association of Attorneys General, all of us together, 50 of us, including the attorneys general from the territories. But now there's a Republican Attorney Generals Association, there's a Democratic Attorney Generals Association, as well as the National Association of Attorneys General. And unfortunately, that has created partisanship. And unfortunately, it has generated the need to raise lots of dollars. And I think that's unfortunate because those dollars come from special interests. And even if an attorney general is, you know, is a person of integrity, but to be able, you know, to have the need to raise this kind of money is not a healthy thing in politics. I've been for you know, all kinds of political financial reform because money plays too important a place in the current state of politics in the United States.
So I have a subject that I really have thought about recently. What could an attorney general do about the parole system in a state?
Well, the attorney general could be an advocate. You know, again, I mean, one of the good things about the Office of Attorney General is that it creates a platform. You have a bully pulpit. You can speak out. You can call press conferences. You can do reports. You can introduce legislation in the state legislature. You can encourage Congress to do certain things. I went and testified 35 times before the United States Congress. Nowhere is it written that that's the role of the Attorney General to do. You can have public hearings. I held 47 public hearings on environmental issues during my time as Attorney General throughout the state. So, you know, there's a way in which the Attorney General, if he or she feels strongly about a certain issue, can try to mobilize political support and political strength.
Can you ever refuse to defend the state?
Well, that's a very interesting philosophical question. It cuts a lot of different ways. You know, as long as there is tolerable authority to defend the state, it's the Attorney General's obligation to defend the state. That's your oath of office. You're there to defend the state. If there is no authority to defend the state, you know, there can be a certain set of circumstances where you say, well, I'm not going to do it. The state still can get representation. It gets outside counsel. You've
been involved in everything, in so many things around the world, right? Is it as gratifying? I mean, I know it's gratifying in some ways. Do you miss the excitement of the local politics?
Look, I did it for 28 years. I loved every day, every minute of it. You know, it was a rare privilege. I mean, I saw it, you know, a lot of people say, ooh, politics, government, and there's enough to cause people to feel depressed these days. I understand that. But I saw government service as a calling. You know, there are certain people in our society who approach their work as a calling. Teachers.
What is that? What is it? Is it the family? Is it religion? Where do you get this desire, this pull?
Well, I mean, you know, first of all, you know, there's an inculcation of values from your family, from your home life. My grandparents were immigrants. They came here. They loved this country. They loved freedom. They knew what oppression was like. They knew, you know, that it was difficult to make a living, but they were always for the little guy, you know, and that value was inculcated in me from my grandparents to my parents to me. And that's why I guess I grew up in a very progressive and liberal household. And then when I had a chance to be in public office, you know, I viewed it as a calling. I was trying to say before, librarians, you know, pursue their career as a calling. Teachers do, doctors do, you know, so why shouldn't people involved in politics and public service have that same calling, serve the public. You've got tremendous ability to reform, to make changes, to make the world a better place. And so, yeah, and my experience is that most people approach government in an honest way. Obviously, there are those who betray the public trust, and you read about them in the newspapers, and that's what grabs the headline.
Right.
But most of the people, I think, approach it in a very sincere and honest and legitimate manner.
And it's the concern also for your community. I mean, even when it comes down to, you don't, not even, I'm not even talking about giving, I'm talking about just a duty that you have to vote. That's the basis of our democracy. And if we don't do that, it's not very good for us.
Absolutely. It's not only, it's the duty to vote, the duty to participate, the duty to get involved, and the duty to serve. So that's why I go and I speak from time to time to young people to say, it's easy to get turned off these days to politics. It's easy to drop out, but no, we need you to roll up your sleeves to jump in. We need your enthusiasm. We need your integrity. We need your principle, your commitment to principle, to clean things up, to make things better. And so it's important not only to vote and to organize and to participate in organizations, but to put yourself forward and run for the school board and run for local office, run for the council, run for the state legislature, get involved. Work in somebody else's campaign, be a staff member of an elected official. There are lots of ways in which you can do public service. And even if you're in the private sector, you mentioned before the private sector, there's a lot of pro bono work done in law firms. And so, there's a lecture, an annual lecture at NYU Law School in my name, where I try to bring every year a prominent person in public service to try to inspire the students to spend either your career in public service, or if you're in your private sector, a part of your life and career in pro bono activity.
In the book, and we're coming to the end of the program, it's really entertaining. I want people to understand that. You learn about Bob's family. You even learn how he fell in love and how that started. And I must say, it was funny to read your first date was at the restaurant named for my husband, who wasn't my husband at the time, right? Jimmy's. That was really funny. Anyway, it shows you the joy and the satisfaction that you get from doing all of these things that Bob has told us. And I certainly enjoyed it tremendously. I really learned a lot and felt an immediate connection.
Ronnie, thanks a lot. And I try to tell people, especially these students and young people who very often I come in contact with, that nothing could be more fulfilling than to work in public service. And when you're at the end of your life and the end of your days and you're lying there in your bed and you're reflecting upon your life, you want to feel good about what you did with your time on this planet. And if you did spend all or a good part of your life trying to make other people's lives better, trying to clean up the environment, try to make this a better place and a better planet, you're not only going to do meaningful things in accomplishing your goals, but you're also going to feel very good about it. You may not add to your pocketbook. Being in public service, is an economic sacrifice, but the gratification level is so high, it's sky high.
I agree. And thank you so much. And I know you're going to inspire people to vote on June 22nd. If people don't vote this year, I don't know what we're going to do.
It's so important to vote. And you can see how every vote counts. Some of these elections are extraordinarily close. And interestingly enough, this is a decennial year, and they're going to redistrict. And not enough people filled out the census forms, and we're losing in New York State a congressional district because I think we lost 89 people. If we had 89 people more, we wouldn't have lost that congressional district.
Incredible. Well, thank you, Bob Abrams. Have a long and happy life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie.